you're talking about reshaping leadership and followership. So what do you mean by reshaping leadership and followership?
I do this with Chat GPT. If I say, what's the opposite of a leader? People would say follower. Is follower actually the opposite of leader? And Chat GPT just sat there for a second. And I thought, uh-oh, you're trained that if somebody goes down, you continue to go after the shooter.
I'm greatly honoured to be joined by Dr. Chris Fuzie. He's had 28 years service with the Modesto Police Force as a lieutenant, where he's been a homicide detective, he's been a hostage negotiation team lead, he's done all kinds of things in his career. He's an incredibly decorated career full of leadership highlights. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I've got a special treat for you today. I'm greatly honoured to be joined by Dr. Chris Fuzie. Dr. Chris has had a decorated career. If I give you all of his achievements in his career, we'll take up the entire show. He's had 28 years service with the Modesto Police Force as a lieutenant, where he's been a homicide detective, he's been a hostage negotiation team lead, he's done all kinds of things in his career. He's been a national instructor for chiefs of police, an incredibly decorated career full of leadership highlights. He's also the head of the CMF Leadership Academy and an author of multiple books, including Because Why, Score, which is about performance counseling, and his latest book called Liminal Space, Reshaping Leadership and Followership. And it's this final book is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about redefining leadership and how it's changing in the world and what it means around followership. So without any further ado, Chris, I would love it if you would say hello to the audience, and I'd love to know a little bit more about that incredible background of yours and what inspired you into writing books, and particularly this book about liminal space.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being here, and that incredible introduction. So, in talking about, getting to this point where I'm writing a book about leadership and followership and reshaping leadership and followership and liminal space and all that, that took almost 40 years from the start of my career as a police officer till, a couple months ago. So it's not something that came very easy, but and the way it happened is, I've grown up here in Modesto, California, since 1965. Joined the police department in 1982 as a community service officer, and then became a police officer shortly thereafter, and then went through, just I say having fun because every day was different. It was a lot of running and chasing and the police stuff, and then I got to about a point in my career. I've been working patrol and doing this for about 18 years, and I started seeing a few of my friends falling off the way, getting injured or having something happen to them, and I started thinking, what's going to happen if I get hurt? So one of my lieutenants, we were sitting in a briefing one day, and I was sitting in the back. All the senior cops would sit in the back at the row, and I'm sitting in the back, and this lieutenant he's talking about your career and career development, that kind of stuff, and he kind of turns and leans around, and he looks straight back towards the back row, towards where I'm at, and he says, if you're going to promote or get anywhere in this department, you need to think about your education. And it was like he just shot a bullet right into the back of my head, and it just kept bouncing around. And I just kept thinking, oh, my education. Yeah, what if I do get hurt? I was seeing all these guys getting hurt. I need to think about my education. And I like to say, up until this point, I only had one PhD, public high school diploma. But I went back to school. I first got my AA degree. This is 40 years old. 40 years old, I went back to school, get my AA degree, and I said, okay, I need to do something different because my competition are the people who are sitting next to me for these supervisor jobs. So I started the bachelor's degree, and it was in org leadership. I wanted something that was different than what I was doing. I mean, I could have gotten an easy one in criminal justice, but I wanted something that if I needed to leave police work, what I could use it for. Well, I started seeing what was going on with this org leadership stuff and how these theories, these leadership theories, were all playing out in the police department. And then I realized they're all playing out in almost every organization in the world. And so it really became interesting to me to see, to apply the theories and the theoretical application to what was happening in the police department. So I did that for about 3 years, 3.5 years to get my bachelor's degree. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go for the master's degree also. And so in 2005, I graduated with a master's degree in organizational leadership and human resources. So right about then, the police department was starting a leadership um, training academy. And this was through the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Well, I was also the lieutenant then in charge of training. And so I had to, evaluate, is this something that we want to keep doing? And I started looking at the person who was doing the teaching there. I realized that they didn't have the training and education to match what it was supposed to be happening. So I asked if I could be an instructor, and I went through all the instructor training, and then I started teaching the leadership program for Modesto Police Department and in California. And so, International Association of Chiefs of Police said, "Hey, we'd like you to teach for us," and so that's what I did. I started teaching for them and working as a lieutenant in the police department. Um, and then it became, just something to do, And then after I retired from the police department, I saw a doctoral program in organizational leadership. So I went to the doctoral program. So let's do that too. Say, what else do you do when you're retired? Play golf, right? So, I said, well, I'll do this thing. And that's when I started realizing all of this led up to looking at behavior as part of leadership. All leadership is all about behavior and creating behaviors and making behaviors. And how do you get people to do things? How do you get cops to run towards people with guns? How do you get firemen to run towards burning buildings? Stuff that the rest of us run away from, right? And they're going towards it. Um, so that's how I got to thinking about this. And actually, with these books, I wrote them backwards. I say backwards in that I started with the Because Why book, and that's evaluating behavior. And then I went to the Score Performance Counseling book, which was about changing behavior and performance counseling and how to avoid the major flaws that most supervisors make while they're doing performance counseling. And then this last book is Liminal Space. I realized about 2019 I started teaching leadership and followership in 2007. But then about 2019, I start realizing, wait a minute, followership is a little more important than what I thought, and we started doing more research with the followership. So that's kind of how this came about. It's just yeah. I mean, that's the short story. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Mhm. Yeah. Right. So it was very interesting, and I actually um, used that example of a petri dish because it was just like that. We would talk about cohesion and how to build cohesion, and then the next day I'm in a staff meeting or a squad meeting, and we're talking about, hey, we all need to work together, and I use the word cohesion, um, and these things. I mean, it was just one right after the other. It was very interesting. Um, there was one instance where we were talking about, I'm trying to think of what it was. We were talking about groupthink. And so that night, or I'm sorry, it was the next night, we're talking about groupthink and how, all the problems with groupthink. The next night, we have a call where there's a gang fight going on and there's some shots fired. And so every cop in the city is rolling to that call. and and one of the cops gets on, and I'm the lieutenant in charge. I'm listening to this stuff, and one of the cops says, "Okay, we're gonna 1198 or meet at a certain church that's nearby where this is happening, so that way we can all be ready and roll in together." So they're all rolling code 3, lights and siren, to a place that's it's not even happening. And so to me, that was an example of groupthink where everybody's still rolling. They're still, we got to get there. We got to do this. It was very urgent, and and I told them to cancel code 3. In other words, keep going, but you don't need lights and siren. You don't have, I don't want you running through an intersection and smashing into some family or something. And so the next day after, they were not happy with that. So the next day, we're in briefing, and I said we need to talk about what happened last night. This idea of groupthink, where you're rolling code 3, and when I say groupthink, I had a few people go, "Oh, more of this educated stuff," and that's exactly what it was. And I started talking about how groupthink causes us problems sometimes, and then we applied it right then to that situation that happened the night before. But having that at the top of my mind when I went to work that night, and then when it happened, it was like, okay, this is not good. Somebody's going to run a red light. Somebody's going to, the cops are rolling code 3. They're running red lights to this thing where it's a possible shooting. We need to stop this, right? This is a groupthink issue. In my mind, that's what it was. And then, so when we debriefed it the next day, it was that immediate application. There was another incident where I'm in class, and it was kind of interesting because it was me, a sheriff's deputy, somebody from mental health, and one of our victim services people, that we're all taking the same kind of program together. And we're in this class, and the instructor is talking about, it's a sociology class. The instructor is talking about domestic violence. And she says, well, men can't be victims of domestic violence. And so I raised my hand. Yes, yeah, I want to disagree with you because, I've arrested men and women for domestic violence. And she goes, no, I've been teaching for 30, however many years. And, I was in social work. I said, well, you need to come ride with me because, you know, women, women do beat up men. So, there is domestic violence on the other side. And she got very angry with me. But then again, go back out in the field. And the very next day, what do we have? We have a case where, and our victim advocate was saying the same thing, and our person from mental health was saying the same thing, and our SO, our sheriff's department person, we're all saying the same thing. And she said, nope, this is not the case. So But then the next day I go out, we have a domestic violence case where the woman was the aggressor and she ended up getting arrested. And then I go to class the next week and this gal says, no, I've looked into this. I've researched it. So, well, obviously you don't know what you're talking about. And so it worked both ways really. So it's not just, how you talk about research informs practice. Well, practice also informs research, and that's what that was. It was really cool to see that happening.
Yeah, I love this, Chris. And the first thing I want to say to the audience here is anyone that is listening to this, and if you are in a domestic violence situation, please do seek help. There are really great organizations out there that can help you. I know it's scary to take that first step, whether you're a man or a woman. If you're in a domestic violence situation, please seek help. There are really good organizations that can help you, and there's always a way out. There's always a solution. You just need to ask for help, and it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's a sign of strength. I love this
Right.
bi-directional thing that you're talking about here, Chris. So that ability to, okay, I learned something from my academic studies last week that can apply in my policing today, and then equally
Right.
in that academic setting to be able to say, well, hang on a second, my lived experience is this. They inform each other, and it's that ability to stop and
Right.
reflect and bring both together that makes for a richer education for you, but also I'm going to say a richer education for those around you, because we all learn from each other, and this ability to put it into practice and learn in real time is quite incredible.
Right.
what what I want to go to now is then thinking about, and this will be hard to imagine for some of us that have not been either in the military or in a policing situation, is some of the real time aspects that we're talking about here. So for most people that are listening to this show, when we're leading, when we're making decisions, quite often if we make a snap decision, it can also be at our peril. We go into firefighting mode instead of making considered decisions and taking our time. And then if we get a decision wrong, it's usually not life threatening or anything like this. Tell us about the pressure
Right.
cooker of the leader in those situations where you do have a squad of cars that are on their way to a shooting. What does it mean from that pressure cooker situation of time critical decision making as a leader?
Well, that's one of the things that's actually that's why I wrote the book, because why is a lot of that decision making is it's not a perfect process. We're people, and uh, what we do is based on our experience, it's based on our knowledge, it's based on our training, it's based on everything we know sometimes. But then you have to throw in, um, what is the time? What does time look like? How much time does it take? What if we wait? What if we don't wait? So all of that takes place. You got to look at the situation itself. As an example, we had one person who was, this is before it became a norm to leave people in their own house. If they're suicidal, they're in their own house. As long as there's nobody else there, uh, what do we do? Do we go in and get them? Do we leave them? And so one of the times we made the decision to just leave the person there. He didn't have any firearms. If I mean, they're in their own house. Their kingdom, their castle. I mean, it sounds terrible. It sounds heartless, but you have to make these decisions based on the situation, and every single situation is different. So that's why in these kind of situations, when you have to make those decisions, it's everything everything you've been trained for, but then also what are your values? What is your thought process? Um, and all of that plays a part in it. Um, that's where training is important. Knowledge of policies and laws is important, because you have to make your best um, not guess, but your best evaluation and your best decision that you can. And so the more you know what the law and the policies are, the more you know about the situation, that's going to be helpful. The problem is all these thoughts that go through your head. So, just as an example, one of my shooting situations, I was face to face with somebody who I'd already fought with. I'd already shot him twice, and I've got him pinned behind a fence, and I'm holding my gun up, and I'm holding him, and he's still reaching for a gun that he had in a backpack with him. And he asked me, he says, "Why are you killing me?" And I said, "I haven't yet." But what went through my mind uh, was my own son. My own son could have been in that situation. I'm sorry about this. It happens because we're human. But I thought this could be my son, same age, same kind of thing going on. And I thought, what would his father think if I killed his son? What would I think as the father? That took maybe zero point 0.5 seconds, if that, to consider that. And that's the one reason why I didn't shoot him. And that decision making, it's all those things that happen. You have tunnel vision, tunnel hearing, focused attention. I can tell you that in that instance, there was an alarm about 5 feet from my head, ringing, big old blaring alarm. I couldn't hear it. To this day, I can tell you that I couldn't hear it because I was so focused on this person. So all of that happens. It's a little easier when you're not in it personally. So uh, you feel more detached, and it's a lot easier to make those decisions because you're not having these same things. You're not having the emotional reaction that you end up having when you're personally involved. So the decision making process is actually easier when that takes place. Um, but it's still, time I think is something that people don't think about as much as because we're always pushed to how do we resolve this? Let's find this. Let's solve this. Let's get it over with. But sometimes that time could be 1/10 of a second, or that time could be 10 hours. So we try to stretch out the time. We try to get people to slow things down. Okay, let's just slow things down. And so we have time to make these cognitive decisions, go from the amygdala to the frontal cortex, so that we can make those decisions with an intelligent thing instead of a knee-jerk or emotional hijacked reaction. So that's part of what that is. It's very complicated kind of thing, and a lot of it goes back to your training.
Really powerful,
Yeah.
Chris, and thank you for sharing that story so openly and vulnerably with us. A few things I want to reflect on. The first one was the emotion in your voice, and we do sometimes get a stereotype of someone that's been in the police force for 28 years
Right.
may have become desensitized and emotionally detached, but that's not what I'm seeing in front of me. I'm seeing a very human person in front of
Right.
me and the humanity in policing is something that is critical for you to make those right decisions
Right.
in those moments. What I'm hearing then is then the situational leadership, to be able to read the situation in front of you,
Right.
the adaptability to be able to do that in real time and to adjust as new information comes in that I didn't have before that might influence what I'm about to do, what my next action is. The aspect of time, how much time do I have to make this decision? And sometimes it
Mhm.
is going to be a microsecond, and other times it's going to be, hang on a second, let's slow the pace down a little bit here. We have time to do so.
Right.
Let's make a more considered decision. So that temporal aspect's really interesting for me. Then the other part that I picked up is what you fell back to in those moments was your values
Right.
and your SOPs. So a value-based decision at that moment in time. Would I be proud of this decision tomorrow? Is it congruent with my values? And then if I'm
Right.
really stuck, let's get to what do the standard operating procedures tell me to do right now? But you're doing all of that in a time that's faster than what I've just described it. You're doing it in
Right.
those
Right.
absolutely critical moments.
Yeah.
What I'd like to go with next is you said something else really interesting before, which is now our very definition of leadership on this show is the ability to inspire people into meaningful action around a worthy cause because they wanted to do it, not because they were told to do it. Now, that's easy for
Right.
me to say in the corporate world, Chris. What you said before
Right.
is you're inspiring people to run towards the very danger that most people would be running away from. How does that
Right.
play out?
That is, it's difficult because this is where you have to know your people. Most people, when I'm just going to use police work because I've never served for any length in the military. But in police work, you get people who come into this for those intrinsic purposes of wanting to help others. You get people that come in here for the higher call kind of thing. And it's not that they're not afraid to go, after somebody with a shotgun or excuse me, or run towards the fire or any of that. There's fear there anyway. It's just you have to overcome that fear in order to complete the task. And so that's where a lot of the training is involved is, people they have to, by repetition, they're going to have to get this. And you mentioned the um, desensitization, and that's really where we do try to desensitize people to some of this, but you also have to keep the focus. So there's a very delicate balance of keeping the focus of the purpose. I'm doing this to help somebody. There's that very delicate balance of knowing your people and what inspires them. Maybe you have somebody who's a baseball coach, right? And so you talk to that person about baseball and how this is kind of like baseball. We want to win the game, but we don't want to win the game at the uh, cost of being unethical. You know, Eh, let's not call it stealing base. Let's call it, acquiring base. I don't know. And so you think about that. You talk to your people differently. Each person has a different motivator, and you have to find out what that motivator is as a leader. Is it because they like the power trip of being a cop? If they do, then those are people we probably want to get rid of. That's not a good choice. If it's because they want to help people and they want to, serve, a lot of the you go into the servant leadership kind of realm here. And a lot of that, I want to serve, I'm going to lead people, but I'm going to help them also. So most of the people I've run into, almost all of them, you get into the job for the fact of helping people. And does it change sometimes? Yeah, it changes over time. And the desensitization happens there. And then sometimes you have to refocus people back to that. But it's all about knowing your people, and getting the right people. That's why it's very difficult in police work to find people now. There's a lot of people don't want to serve others. They just going to focus on themselves. And so when we do backgrounds, we find that quite a bit. You do probably about 100 backgrounds for every one person, for every one applicant. So there's a lot of money being spent on getting the right people.
Chris, and
Mm.
certainly tapping into purpose is what I'm hearing. I'm also hearing
Mhm.
tapping into values, and I'm hearing you
Mhm.
really take the time to know each individual, because each individual on this planet has a different set of purposes and values. The other thing I was
Correct.
picking up there was this courage, and courage is the ability to act despite fear, not the absence of fear. And in fact, I'd be quite
Right.
worried if they were fearless, I don't really think that there is
Yes.
such a thing, but if they were fearless, I think they'd become
Yeah.
reckless and they'd start making
Yes.
decisions that put themselves in danger, and that's not going to serve anyone well, right? So tapping into
Right.
that purpose, tapping into their values, and then tapping into the courage of to take action despite fear, not the absence of fear. How does that sit with you?
Right. Well, I had an incident with one of the officers who had gone over to fight in Iraq when after 9/11, and it was a reserve officer, and then he came back and he was hired as a regular. And then I noticed after a while that he was going to certain calls, gun calls, multiple suspect kind of calls, where he wasn't taking a backup or a cover unit, or he would cancel his backup or cover unit. I said, no, that's not going to happen. We're not going to do that. So I started talking to him. He goes, look, I've been to a war. I've been shot at. I've been this. I've been that. Okay, fine. So I can handle this. I go, well, I'm still responsible for, your life, and your family's going to get mad if, something happens. We just reckless. And that's why I use that term. If we just recklessly allow you to do whatever you're going to do, plus you're creating a target, you're making the situation worse. And so we had to stop that. We had to take him off the street, and get him some counseling and get him, some treatments, and then he realized what he was doing, and he came back to work, and I mean, we really watched this guy, but he started doing things exactly how we wanted him to do them. So yeah, that is a concern there.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Chris. And what I'm picking up on there again is what action is going to serve us well, everyone well right now, and
Right.
those actions were not serving well. But then to tap into that's a behavior. What's driving that behavior? Where is that coming from? Is
Yeah.
it some post-traumatic stress disorder? Is there something missing in this person's life that they're
Right.
looking to fill a void, to unpack the behavior? Which I think is a really
Right.
interesting segue to then talk about behavioral based leadership. And in
Okay.
liminal space, you're talking about reshaping leadership and fellowship. So what do you mean by reshaping leadership and fellowship?
Well, right now, and I've done this with different groups. Right now, if I say, what's the opposite of a leader, people would say follower. And I've done this several times, and now people know. Wait a minute, he's setting us up, you know. But we still have that mental scheme in our heads that the opposite of leader is follower, and when it's really not the case. I did this with Chat GPT. I typed in what's the opposite of leader, and it said follower. This is actually in the book. And then I said, okay, well, what does it mean to be the opposite? And it gives me the definition of being the opposite, contrary, that kind of stuff. And I said, well, then if leader and follower are attempting to do the same thing, and they're in the same organization, is follower in that context of what you just said as opposite, is follower actually the opposite of leader? And Chat GPT just sat there for a second, and I thought, "Uh-oh, I broke it." And then it got some of these ellipsis points, and then next thing I see is it says, "Thank you for clarifying," or something like that. And then actually in that context, leading and following are not opposites. They're actually complementary. And I actually put the words that came out of the whole process is actually in the book. And so when you think about this as leading and following, um, we're doing the same behaviors, which leads into the liminal space part of it. Is that if we're doing the same behaviors, like if I'm working for a CEO, and I have to do what the CEO tells me, but then I have other people underneath me, or my direct reports. Now I have to do what the CEO wants, so I'm following, but then I also have to get the people below me to do that. And so now I'm leading and following simultaneously. And that's where this idea of liminal space or transitional space comes in. And so when we talk about the behavior, if you are leading and following simultaneously, then it doesn't matter whether you're the leader or the follower or which role you're acting in, you still have to do the same behavior. You still want the same behavior. So then the behavior becomes more important. And if you're focusing on the behavior and not the position, now we are starting to actually change or influence what's going on. And so that's why this behavior based leadership, to me, is where we're going, where we're headed. We need to start focusing more on the behaviors of people who lead and follow simultaneously. And what are those behaviors? What are the similar behaviors? And I started looking at this. What happened was, as I was doing the trainings, started in 2010 and went to about 2019, 2020. Um, every time I would do a training, we'd say, okay, everybody in the class, I want 2 traits of a great leader. We start talking about great leaders. Okay, 2 traits of great leaders. And like a good consultant, you write it on paper and stick it on all over the walls and stuff. And so I would do that. And then later on in the day, we start talking about followership. And what is a good follower? What is an exemplary follower? Putting all of the followership types up there and discussing it. And then I go to the list. I'd say, how many of these traits or behaviors do you not want in your followers? And I kept track of those lists. And I kept track of those lists for that whole time. And, you get duplicates, everybody says communication, everybody says honesty, everybody says. And so I boiled it down to 86 behaviors that people have said they want those behaviors in different amounts, depending on what you're doing. They want those same behaviors, those same leader and follower behaviors in their leaders and followers. Those are the behaviors they want in both their exemplary followers and their great leaders. So now we have a list of behaviors. Well, I thought I was unique in doing that. Well, I'm not. There's a person down in the University of Texas doing the same thing. There's another one, I think it's University of Mississippi, doing the same thing. People up in, I think it's Ohio, they're doing it. So everybody's starting to see this. It's not about the position as much as it is about the behavior. And then when you think about it, let's say you have an organization of 150 people, right? You have one boss, the owner, CEO, whatever. If we did a tug of war, who's going to win? We put the leaders on one end, the followers on the other end. Who's going to win? Right? so it's not yeah, that's a visual that I recently, it's like, I want to do a tug of war. I want to do a tug of war. Yeah. And so yeah, right. And so you look at that, and actually they're not pulling opposite directions. They're pulling the same way. So, they have to figure out some way of doing that. But it's about the behavior, and that's where all of this you end up pushing the positions to the back and worrying about the behavior.
Yeah, really good,
Go
Chris.
ahead.
This liminal space is a really interesting concept. I've thought of this before, but never had a good definition for how to describe it. But we are always concurrently leading and following, and similar to what you're saying, I would
Right.
say that it's not even, we're not even talking organizational structure here. I'm talking within a team of peers. There's going to be micro moments of time
Mm-hmm.
where you're leading, inspiring, and influencing people's behavior. And then there's going to be other times where you're in a bit more of a receptive mode of being encouraged and
Mm-hmm.
inspired by those around you. And when we can do this in real time, if we're open to each other, we're now in the world of co-creation, co-leadership, where you're all hopefully heading towards the same purpose, but you're doing it together and there's so much more that you can do together than you can by any individual leader. How does that sit with you?
Right. Well, I'd say you're hitting the nail right on the head because, and when we're talking about this, I go back to thinking about my life in the I say my past life in the law enforcement world. Is that from the very beginning that in the police academy, you're either positioned as the lead officer, or any call you get, you're either the primary officer, or you're the one that handles the call, or you're the backup or the cover. Um, and so, and depending on what the call is, maybe it's in somebody else's beat. They're the primary and you're the cover. Or you have multiple people and you're going to go search a building. Well, if you're the primary, you take point. Or you look at some of these SWAT teams where they have interchangeable positions. And so from the time I started, where it didn't even dawn on me that that's what was happening in the police world. But from the very start, you're doing leading and following simultaneously. Let's say something happens where the leader ends up they're busy, or they've taken somebody into custody, or they've stopped. Then you have to take the lead. And so I have a shirt that says "Lead as or follow as if you are leading. If the situation changes, you just may have to." And you think about some of those shooting incidents where teams of police officers are supposed to go in, and and you're trained that if somebody goes down, you continue to go after the shooter. If somebody for some reason takes somebody, or there's somebody they stop, whatever, you continue to go after the shooter. And so you go from a support role instantly to a lead role. And the role doesn't matter, it's the behavior that matters. So it's continuing to get that mission completed.
I tell you what's jumping into my head as we talk about it,
So,
Chris, is the following statement: is that collaboration and leadership is a team sport, and we don't always think of it that way. If we think about it hierarchically, we think about the leader as opposed to leadership
right,
and leadership behaviors, and that leadership is a team sport, and that we dynamically adjust to the
right,
situation that we're faced with. And you'll have people step forward, step
right,
back, step left, step right, and you're now almost like a collective organism that is adjusting to the situation and the changes that are happening around you. And that those behaviors,
right,
when you tap into them, you're going to tap into them for greater effect.
right. Yeah, I mean, yes, exactly. If you look at, I mean, we just had the Olympics on, right? And so you see some of these teams of two. Well, it's still a team. And so when you say leadership is a team sport, it really is, because you have to have a leader and a follower and the situation or the context in order to have leadership. We talk about leadership, it's not the person or the acts of the person. Leadership is a process. And to have that process, you have to have the leader, a follower, and the context. You take any one of those three away, you don't have leadership. Let's say you have a leader and a follower, but they don't do anything, and there's nothing to solve, and there's no goal, and they just sit there. Well, there's no leadership happening, right? So it is a team sport. And so you think about in the Olympics, if like the volleyball, I love watching volleyball. I don't know why, but when they have the two people playing the volleyball, right? Well, one hits it, and maybe it goes a little sideways. The other one has to go get it because you can't hit it twice. So the other one has to go. So now they're in the. It's just that changes all the time, and it is a dynamic sport, and it's amazing to think about it that way. And a lot of people don't think about leadership as a process, and we really need to, because the leader and the follower are the team players in that. At least one leader and at least one follower is what you have to have. But most organizations, we have multiple.
Your beach volleyball example is a really good one, which is because then what's happening is the two players are adjusting to each other. So if one person went up
Mhm.
for a block, the other person's going, oh, okay, I better be ready if the ball comes off the block.
Right.
So they're adjusting to each other, and they're adjusting to the dynamics of where is the ball, what is the opposition team doing? Am I going to go for a spike now, or am I going to go for a tap? You're dynamically adjusting with each other, and you almost become two people that become one, and you start moving in
Yeah.
different shapes to be able to match the situation that's in front of you. And I think that's a really interesting takeaway for
Right.
our leaders today. The sports metaphor is really easy to understand, whether it's rugby, volleyball, cycling, things like team pursuit cycling. They're always
Mhm.
adjusting and all this kind of stuff. It's really obvious. My question to the audience
Yeah.
is, are you doing that in your teams? Like, so if you're out there in corporate world today, or if you're in the police force, like Chris has been for many years, and you're in your team leadership situation, is your team dynamically adjusting to each other? Are they concurrently leading and following? Are they supporting and complementing each other in the right way? Or are they all just doing their own thing and going in their own direction? Or are they all just sitting there waiting for the leader to make decisions? And I'm going to say, if you're in the second or third situation, you're not tapping into the power of what leadership and followership could be. How does that summary sit with you, Chris?
It's great. And the sports analogy, because I just thought about the sports analogy while we're talking, but you picked up on it really well, is that it doesn't matter which sport it is. Ping pong was very interesting. The doubles ping pong was because of the same thing. And so, yeah, you have to, and when you think about how teams work, if you're talking about the group structural dimensions, or you're talking about the group processes, there's cohesion on both. And you have to have that cohesion. You have to have the interplay. You have to have people adjusting to each other, as you put it. And that has to do with the relationship. That has to do with tasks. That has to do with the construct of the team and how that's done, which are all things that you look at in team development theory. And so you can actually break down, I think you could actually break down a, a tennis match by how they do that, a team's a doubles tennis match. Or, that'd be, now that'd be fun to do. Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one too.
Yeah, I'm loving this, Chris. And
Yeah.
I tell you what I'm also taking away from it is, I think what will unlock when we really study this and see it is the power of resilience, because a team that is dynamically adjusting around each other
Hmm.
is also going to cope better when things don't go perfectly to plan. It might be a team member gets sick. It might be a team member trips over, whatever the case might
Right.
be. If you're in that dynamic situation where people are adjusting around each other, you're going to be more resilient as a team. And then the second part is the multiplication
Yeah.
effect. Is, this I'm going to ask you in a moment, what's your favorite quote? I have two favorite quotes. One of them is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Mm.
And we were talking about cycling
Yeah.
before. We know that a peloton on a road race cycling race can go so much faster than an individual that has decided to be a hero, and off they go, try and ride by themselves. So this resilience,
Hmm.
and then the multiplication, when we're able to tap into this co-creation and this dynamic ability to lead and follow concurrently. I think it's really powerful, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say a couple factors in that resilience is that the ability to adjust, right? You have to be able to adjust, and then with that comes a little bit of grace. You have to have a little bit of grace, and not everybody's going to be perfect. People are going to make mistakes. Okay, don't do the blame game. Don't do. Let's just let's get the task done. Let's focus on the task. Let's focus on the behavior. Let's get it done. Give people a little bit of grace, and don't play the blame game.
Then what we can do is we can learn
Yeah,
together and we can fail forward, and but it needs that grace and it needs the
right.
humility as well, of others to be able to do that. Okay, really good. Now I'd like to take us to our rapid round. So these are the same 4 questions that we ask all of our
Uh-oh.
guests. So first one, what's the one thing you know now, Dr. Chris Fuzie, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
How to be a good listener. I wish I listened a lot more when I was just 20 years old, but just like most people when they're, 18, 19, 20, they're ready to go. They think they've had 20 years experience and they know everything, and yeah, you can't stop me. I'm going. Right. So I wish wish that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what's your as an author, what is your favorite book?
Well, there's actually two, but the one I'm going to say today is The Courageous Follower by Ira Shalef. The Courageous Follower is, I mean, it talks about uh, i- doing what we're supposed to do, and even when we don't want to do it. I mean, we talked about courage before, and you eloquently explained how that works. And so that's to me, that's one of my favorite books. Yeah.
Really interesting. Okay, very good. And what's your favorite quote?
Well, it's actually from that book, and I'm going to read it because I have I have it right here at my desk. And it's the paradox of followership. And it says, we are responsible, whether we lead or follow, we're responsible for our own actions. So, again, behaviors, right? We are responsible for our own actions, and we share responsibility for the actions of those whom we can influence. Um, and the reason I like that quote is that it talks about leaders and followers. It talks about you can apply that quote to a parent. You can apply that quote to a CEO. You can apply that quote to the president of the United States. You can apply that quote to an Eskimo and his family. It applies everywhere. Um, but the other thing about that quote is that we are responsible. So we're responsible for our own actions and others that we can influence, and um, it makes it clear to me that we all need to share that responsibility, and not just well, you're in charge or you're this or you're that, and that's where it kind of goes back to that blame game and a little bit of grace.
Yeah, loving this. I'm loving the air of responsibility and
Yeah.
accountability in what you're saying. Yeah, really good, Chris. And finally, there's going to be people that are listening to this, and they're probably quite enthralled with this concept of liminal space, but also in you and your career and everything you've learned as a leader. How do people find you if they'd like to know more, Chris?
Well, I try to hide as much as possible, but I do have a website. It's www.cmfleadership.com, and on there you can contact me from there, or there's links to the book. There's also this podcast will be on there, so I'm going to make sure that we have all that going. And then, or you can, I just have to remember where I work and who I am, and you can email me at chris@cmfleadership.com. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
All right, brilliant. And I strongly encourage people to grab hold of the books. There's multiple books. There's 3 in total, but Liminal Space is the new one. Really interesting concept around reshaping what it means around leadership and fellowship and this concurrent activity that we're all doing it together. And if we can tap into this, we can be so more resilient and so more powerful through the multiplication effect. Really interesting conversation, Chris. Thank you so much for your time today, for your gift of your time with us and your wisdom and insights today. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for letting me be here, and I love how you pulled some of these things out of my ramblings. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.